Hello, everybody. I'm Sarah. I've been with IdeaScale for about 5 years now, and I'm the director of two different communities here. The first is called innovationmanagement.se. It's our innovation news and resources platform, which has thousands of articles from hundreds of thought leaders all around the world. We publish at least a couple of new long-form articles each week, almost all of which are evergreen. It's also a great way to reach a wide network of innovation leaders if you have a resource that you would like to share. And I'll include a link to it at the end here. I also am the director of IdeaScale Crowd, which is our public crowdsourcing community. We've worked with companies and organizations large and small to develop new products and services, provide consumer insights data, and help with creative problem solving and idea validation. It's a really wonderful solution if you don't have the time or resources to build and maintain a community of your own, or if you want to spin up a crowdsourcing campaign quickly without needing to even learn how to use the IdeaScale software, because we do it all for you. We have right now 30,000 members in IdeaScale Crowd, and we've worked with companies like Target, Hyundai, 3M, and lots more. We have also worked with current IdeaScale customers who already have their own communities, but who want to jump over to a new one for a one-off campaign outside of their own network. We help you with all steps of your crowdsourcing campaign, so it's as hands-off as possible for you, from planning to actively running, including all of the outreach to the community, to gathering all of the ideas submitted during your campaign and developing in-depth reports with guidance to help you validate the ideas that you've gathered through the campaign. I also have to apologize. I have a dog that you might hear in the background here.
I was going to ask what your dog's name was, Sarah, since she's also going to be on the webinar with us.
Her name is Mimi. She was very quiet all day today until just now. So I think probably the mailman is outside, maybe. So today, Mimi and I are very excited to share some insights and best practices for those of you who are new to crowdsourcing and may not have run your first campaign yet. Or if you have run a campaign or two, I hope this presentation can be a helpful roadmap for ways that you might like to improve your future campaigns, help them run smoothly, and get the types of interaction and participation that you're looking for. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen real quick. There we go. Can y'all see that?
I've got it. The 5 things we'll cover.
All right. So today we're going to talk about what's your reason for running a crowdsourcing campaign? How do you want to break down your challenge? Who's in your crowd? What's the incentive for participation? And what's the criteria for a promising idea? So let's get started. What is your reason for running a crowdsourcing campaign? What is the problem you're trying to solve? And why do you want to get the crowd involved? And there are many ways to involve the crowd, from idea validation. Oh my gosh, Mimi. I'm so sorry, you guys. To new product and service development. What aren't you offering customers that they might like to see? Improvements to existing products or services. What are some pain points your customers might encounter and how can they be improved? And how can you expand uses of your products or services? What are some new markets that you could be tapping into? And are there ways people have been using your products or services that you didn't know about that can be explored? So as you think through your reason for running a crowdsourcing campaign and for getting the crowd involved in a project, consider the stages of development. The crowd can be super helpful in the first stages of development, particularly with recommending brand new ideas. A couple of campaigns that we've run are, what are some new products that you'd like to see in Target's dorm room line this season? And what are some new McDonald's breakfast menu items that you'd like to try? But that shouldn't necessarily be where crowdsourcing begins and ends with your project. If you've found yourself writing and editing something and looking at it over and over until you start to make obvious mistakes and kind of your eyes glaze over, you probably get why it's super important to have someone look at it. So you may have a smart, creative, hardworking team you're working with on a new project, but it could be good to get the crowd involved in the development process at various stages. It's easy to fall into an echo chamber. So relying on the crowd for a little bit of feedback there is a really great way to escape that echo chamber and to think differently about the problem you're trying to solve. So as you start to think through your reason for running a campaign, consider how much do you want from the crowd? Do you want to stop at brainstorming, or do you want to pull the thread on some of the top ideas generated from your campaign and get the crowd involved in idea refinement to development and even launching your new product or service? At what point do you want to involve the crowd? So as I mentioned, there are ways to crowdsource at all stages of development. And at what stage or different stages do you want to get some participation there? And then what ultimately do you want to achieve with this particular campaign? Do you want to collect ideas to bring to your team for refinement? Do you want the crowd to help refine those ideas? Do you want to circle back later and ask that same crowd to test a new product you've developed based on their recommendations? And here's an example of what you shouldn't do when thinking about why you want to run a crowdsourcing campaign is, I don't know, or let's leave it open-ended. You will set yourself up for failure as you start to get and even evaluate ideas. You have to ask yourself, what do you want to do with the ideas that you've gathered? What is the purpose of conducting a campaign? And if you don't know, you're going to be overwhelmed once the ideas start coming in. And you may even be disappointed if the ideas don't get to the heart of what you're trying to figure out. You may not collect the exact information you're looking for, or you may not know what to do with the information you've received. So here's an example of a good kind of problem statement. What am I trying to achieve with this campaign? Say I'm a food supplier, I work with a large coffee chain, we want to figure out what new pastries to add to the bakery. So we want to go to the crowd and ask, what do we not have that you'd like to see? What are some improvements to different pastries that you like, but maybe there can be a cherry version of this when we only have apple right now. From gathering that feedback, we can approach a chain with new bakery items and what we can offer as a vendor. And we ask this because knowing your reason for crowdsourcing at all, it sets you up for success from the beginning and allows you to think through all the stages of your campaign, from developing the prompt all the way to evaluating ideas and bringing them to development and ultimately launch. So let's look at the second question to ask as you're starting your campaign is, how do you want to break down your challenge? So building on to the first question, this is, you ask yourself, how much do you want the crowd to answer? And the most successful campaigns we've seen on IdeaScale Crowd have had two types of questions for our community. The first is, what are some new products or services that you'd like to see offered by this brand? So for example, Target asked our community about some new products that they'd like to see in their dorm room collection that season. And this was a really successful campaign because they focused on one particular section of the store, and actually a smaller subset within the larger home furnishing sections, which helped narrow the focus. And at the same time, it gave people the opportunity to think creatively about the many different products they'd like to see offered for students to use in their dorm rooms. And answers ranged from peel and stick decals for mirrors and chalkboards to microfiber bed sheets with storage pockets and tons more. Based on those ideas, they got hundreds of ideas from our community. They ended up launching 7 new products to add to their collection. And the answers didn't even have to be very detailed, but they did need to be actionable. And the activity during the campaign, like votes and discussion, helped narrow down the most promising product. The second type of question that's been really successful with IdeaScale Crowd is, how would you improve this, or what would encourage you to use this? And that can be a product, service, or activity. So another example, last summer, we ran a campaign for Fat Pipe, a co-working space that began losing members when COVID hit. They asked our community for ideas on what would encourage them to be part of a co-working space once things were a bit safer. They also wanted to learn what people liked and disliked about working at home or in an office, whether they had experience with co-working spaces and what they'd improve about them in general, what kind of activities, any kind of community building activities that they'd like to be involved in, and even some questions about what people would like to see in terms of cleanliness and sanitation practices. And our crowd posted, they had 1 month for this campaign. Our crowd posted 85 different ideas spanning more than 100 pages and discussing how their work life will fundamentally change. And they even posted links to actual products they'd like to see in co-working spaces and in offices in general, like a foot operated door handle, for example. An example of a bad answer to the question, how do I want to break down my challenge, is to keep your question too broad and not giving enough for the community to really work with. So if Fat Pipe had come to our crowd and said, what's the future of work? That doesn't really narrow down what they're looking for. They wanted our community to be creative and give insights about particularly co-working, but also other areas of working in an office versus at home that could be applicable to a co-working space. You also don't want to force a yes on an assumed premise. You don't want to give our community too narrow constraints, and you don't want to run an idea validation campaign that forces people to validate an idea that you have an assumption on that might not really be completely right. So, whoop. There we go. So here's an example of a great answer. Our most recent campaign, which just wrapped up last month, was insurers looking for your ideas around how the insurance industry can develop new products and services to mitigate risks to vulnerable populations. They asked our community to think about seven different points, which you can see on this page here. And they even gave a completely out of the box sample idea following those points so that our community could think beyond insurance products that they already use or that are ubiquitous. And insurance isn't something your average person knows the ins and outs of. So giving some guidelines and a sample idea helped our crowd to think creatively. And this resulted in ideas ranging from water scarcity to unemployment and underemployment rather, to digital identity theft and lots more. And as a result, almost every one of the ideas posted in that campaign covered all 7 points in detail, and the sponsor was able to immediately identify several that they wanted to explore further. So each of these customers asked realistic questions with a known goal in mind. They're able to take insights learned from the community and develop them into new products, services, and offerings. All right, let's get to our third question. Who is your crowd? So as you're developing your problem statement and goals for your campaign, think about who's in your crowd. Do you want your campaign to be internal, say only open to employees of your company, or do you want it to be external and available to the public? And do you even want to segment your audience, maybe geographically or by areas of interest or expertise? And we ask this because depending on the campaign you want to run, you may want to segment your audience. If you're looking for employee feedback, like say for internal process development, or to learn how different departments within your company manage different projects, it makes more sense to crowdsource internally rather than externally in some cases. And if you're looking for in-depth proposals like an RFP process, you might want to do some targeted outreach to people who have specific backgrounds and skill sets. With all of that said, my favorite thing about IdeaScale Crowd is its diversity. And it's been incredibly important for getting creative and insightful ideas for campaigns on a really wide variety of topics and for companies and organizations, both large and small. Almost all of our campaigns are open to anybody that would like to participate, and they're self-selecting. So if a person doesn't think they have something to contribute to a particular challenge, or if they're just not interested, they're not going to participate. And alternatively, we've run campaigns where people who have never participated before come out of the woodwork to share thoughtful, detailed, relevant ideas because this is the one challenge where they really think that they can shine. Here's a great example of a challenge with a specific need, but that benefited from a really diverse community of solvers. A partner of the Nature Conservancy wanted to share ideas on how to demarcate Tanzania's Lake Tanganyika, which is one of the largest lakes in the world and is home to hundreds of unique and protected species. So to help protect the ecosystem, the Tanzanian government established a national park that extends about a mile offshore into a virtual boundary to restrict fishing. And with fishing being a major source of income there, it's kind of difficult to enforce the boundary. So our community was asked for ideas on how to mark that boundary more clearly while still allowing fishing in areas close to it. And it was open to anybody in our general crowd, even though this challenge was specific to this lake. And the sponsor was open to ideas from people outside of Tanzania and who didn't necessarily work for a national park or other environmental service. We gathered 90 ideas in a month, and recommendations were given for different technologies that were already being employed with success elsewhere, or even existing products that aren't necessarily being used at that scale, but that could. When you're thinking about who's in your community and whether to segment it, I would recommend that you don't lock down your challenge unnecessarily. And it's kind of a case-by-case basis, and there's not necessarily like a bad answer here. But I would encourage you to think about the wealth of knowledge that comes from a diverse community. Is it completely necessary to lock your challenge down to people who have firsthand knowledge of your industry or niche, or who live in a particular area, or who fit into some other demographic? If you don't really need to, I would say keep your mind open and consider all of the amazing, amazing ideas that you can get from the crowd. And you never know what someone's background is. You never know what kind of expertise or creative ideas that they can give. The best answers can come from anywhere. And that's if you're looking for ideas for new products, ways to improve a service, or ways to encourage people to take an action, open your challenge to people outside of your comfort zone or your known or assumed network. And I've included a couple examples of cross-industry collaboration. But there's one, I wanted to highlight a campaign that we've also run on Crowd with Sterilite, which asked our community how to improve storage containers. And it seems like such a broad ask, and one that you can't get super creative with, because how do you improve on a box? But within 1 week, our crowd posted 146 different ideas. And after narrowing down the most promising ones, Sterilite took one to development, which eventually resulted in a patent. You can now purchase their fresh scent box, which comes with a vent for a dryer sheet in its lid, allowing you to store clothing long-term without it getting that musty storage smell. And that idea came from our crowd community. It's also good to note that you may still want to collect information from participants if you want to learn more about their background and purchasing habits, and if it helps you narrow down a promising or winning idea. So as you're building a campaign, this is something that you can ask, perhaps as a short survey along with the idea submission process. Let's move on to our fourth question, which is, what is the incentive for participation? You should consider, why should people share ideas at all? What is the reason for taking part in your campaign? And you can get creative with incentives. So I've listed 3 here. Monetary incentives are definitely the most popular option for our sponsors on IdeaScale Crowd. You can, for example, pay $1,000 for a top idea and $500 for a few runner-up ideas. Or if you're looking for as much participation from as many people as possible, you can incentivize per idea. So one of our customers will give $10 per actionable, relevant, and detailed enough idea that fits within what they're looking for in that campaign. You can also do recognition incentives, which is really great for, say, you can have the winner pitch their idea to leadership, or they can be featured on your website or communication materials with your new product launch, or any other type of recognition you can think of. And then social incentives, which is really great for encouraging teamwork. If you're running a team-based challenge within your company, for example, maybe the group that develops a winning idea can, get tickets to a baseball game or take the next couple of Fridays off. You do want to tie your incentive to the goal. So think about quality versus quantity, and whether you want to incentivize for one of those two, which I think is probably one of the easier ways to begin to think about how to incentivize. So if you're looking for like a really detailed, well thought out idea from the community, then offering a really solid prize for that top idea or group of ideas encourages them to put more consideration and effort into each entry. So going back to the co-working space, they offered a top prize and a few runner-up prizes, and it resulted in hundreds of pages, single-spaced, on a Word document of of like 85 different ideas. Now, if you want to kind of prioritize quantity to get as much participation from as many people as possible, then you can incentivize for that. Like the example I gave earlier of offering $10 per relevant, detailed, and actionable idea within whatever criteria you set as what means relevant, actionable, and detailed enough. And this is really great if you're trying to collect kind of survey-based feedback or just kind of get as many ideas as you want around a particular product or service. You definitely don't want to just not provide an incentive. Participation isn't a compelling enough reason for people to share ideas, and it will be like pulling teeth getting people to share anything at all, even if they really like your product, if they know your brand, especially if they are very familiar with your brand. So instead, try something like this. All of the things that I just said, tie your incentive to the goal. Think about whether you're looking for quality versus quantity and get creative with your incentives. If you can't offer cash prizes, think about other ways that you can recognize winners and let them know their contributions are valuable. Sorry. Sorry. Skipping ahead, that got lost. Oops. Okay. And then the last bit of advice that I have is ask yourself, what's your criteria for a promising idea? And that ties back to the very first question that you ask, which is, what is your reason for conducting a crowdsourcing campaign? So a few basic ways to consider ideas is activity from the community. How many upvotes did an idea receive, or how controversial was that idea? Are some ideas getting more participation than others, and are there comments and discussion on those ideas? Does your campaign have multiple points to consider, and do you want top ideas to cover all or any of those points? Do you want to reward participants who share multiple ideas? Do you want to give greater consideration to ideas from users in a particular demographic? For example, if you're launching a new product on the West Coast, do you want to highlight ideas from people who say they live on the West Coast? Do you want completely out of the box ideas, something your team hasn't considered at all before? And then, of course, what internal constraints do you have? Scope, cost, time. Our last example of a bad answer is, again, not knowing or keeping it completely open-ended. You do need to have somewhat of an idea of what you're looking for in the most promising submissions, even at a very basic level. Actively following the campaign as people share their ideas will help you get acquainted with trends that are emerging throughout the challenge. And this is especially important if you're looking for in-depth answers to a question. You'll be able to read and digest the ideas a bit more easily than reading dozens or even hundreds of pages of submissions at the end. And again, with the getting outside of the box and escaping the echo chamber, don't ignore ideas that don't fit into your assumed premise. So on that note, be open to being surprised. You might find during the course of your campaign that in addition to the ideas that you thought you'd get, you may find a trend that you hadn't thought of, and that could be really important to your product or to even your industry. So going back to the insurance campaign that we just wrapped up last month, again, the challenge was to find insurance industry products and services to help vulnerable populations. And while the sponsor did find several ideas that they could immediately take to their working group for development and exploration, they also found that there was a gap in participants' understanding of what services are already available to them. So in a follow-up call with Insure to evaluate ideas, they said they'd be interested not only in developing new products and services based on those ideas generated by our community, but also exploring better communication to the public about what's already there for them. So knowing your idea evaluation criteria will help you with all parts of your campaign, from developing the problem statement to even putting your incentives together, and it keeps you from becoming overwhelmed as ideas start coming in, and they can definitely come in quickly. And just as my dog starts barking again, I've got this final page of resources, recap of our 5 questions asked, and some links to learn more about our communities. Well, about the communities that I manage.
Well, I'd say that Mimi was, for the most part, very engaged in the discussion. So thank you, Mimi. And hopefully we can answer some of the questions from you guys now in the audience. Lots of good stuff here, though. I really love that you provided some examples, Sarah. I really like the Lake Taniaka. How did you say the name?
Tanganyika.
Tanganyika. It's so cool that they could find opportunities for such a specific place from such a broad audience. And I actually, one of my favorite examples of the best ideas can come from like surprising places is this story of how one of the guys who created the Victoria's Secret Angels wings that they use on like the runways at Victoria's Secret shows actually used some of the stuff that they learned on those angels wings to build mechanisms in the NASA gloves. So it's really funny, some of these places where you find adjacent offerings. I need the Fresh Vent Sterilite box for all the stuff that I need to store.
Oh, absolutely. I live in Florida, so I have no use for all these winter clothes I had from DC. So
yeah. And on your incentives slide too, I just wanted to say from our research with IdeaScale customers, the most common incentive that is a very successful incentive, whether you include the monetary rewards or not, although we do encourage monetary rewards as well, is recognition, like how powerful that can be to highlight the contributions of an ideator.
Absolutely.
So,
and it's a great way to get more people involved, especially if you're running a crowdsourcing campaign within your own company, which is more people within more departments to actively participate.
Right. It's also proof that the system works once you're finding out like, oh, they really do listen to so and so who's on the other side of the world or in a totally different department than mine. So I do have some questions coming in. So one of the questions that we had was, who should be involved in defining the criteria?
Ooh, that is a good question. It depends on the challenge and the team. So I would say anyone that, man, that is, I would say kind of all stakeholders, at least in the planning process, but that can be a little bit too many cooks in the kitchen. So I would say you should at least find one person to kind of champion the development of this project, designate them as kind of the project manager for this part of it, and have them as kind of the megaphone and champion of your crowdsourcing efforts here, and narrowing down the challenge, figuring out what you actually want to find from the community, and helping to evaluate those ideas and figuring out what that evaluation process is.
I was going to say the same thing is like you find who your stakeholder is who's going to be implementing those ideas, and they're far more likely to actually take action on them if you bring them in from the beginning of the process too. So I think that's a great way to answer that question. Somebody wants to know what the incentive strategy was for the Lake Tanganyika case. I'm so sorry, I cannot remember how to say that.
That one was a grand prize with runner-up prizes. So that was a monetary incentive.
Somebody wanted to know, how do you alert the crowd to a new challenge?
We do. So over on IdeaScale Crowd, we manage the whole community on our end. So we don't have any customers doing any outreach that you might not have the time or resources for. So we have everybody on a mailing list. We alert them to new challenges as they're about to launch. We tell them, get ready, 24 hours. We are posting this new challenge. Here's what we're asking. Here's what the incentives are. Here's how you can participate. And then throughout the challenge, from launch to a midpoint to wrap up, we just continue reaching out through email and even recruiting new people to join the discussion through social media and other networks.
We've got a question here about, how do you respond to and manage some of the non-winning ideas?
Yeah, so I personally follow up with everybody that participates in a campaign. I'll first let the winners know, here's your prize. Let's get this sent along to you. But I also will send out a wrap-up email to our community saying, here are some top winning ideas. Thank you for participating. But we have a lot of people that participate in every campaign. And those people don't win every time, but they want to know what the winning ideas were. And some of them even ask for, pointers on how they can improve later. So I do like to send a personal thank you to people that participate, and also just follow up with those kind of super users, or even first-time contributors, especially people that joined particularly to participate in that campaign.
I was just going to ask if the crowd ever emails back or asks for follow-up or engages with you personally. So it sounds like they do, certainly finding out what happens with some of those ideas. But I didn't realize they asked for like pointers about how to better develop their ideas.
Yeah. It's a really cool community. It's, even though it's all online and it's kind of a competition in a lot of ways, people still really love to read other people's ideas and comment on them and participate. And I think people have kind of made friends through the community even. So it's fun. Oh,
We've got a few questions about kind of what you can expect when you launch a challenge. I don't know if you have answers to all these questions, but maybe even just estimates would work. So how long does it usually take to see some of the first few ideas come in? Do they come in right away? And what should you do if you don't see ideas right away?
right. So we have found that if you're not seeing ideas coming in, it's because you didn't offer an incentive. So, but when you launch a campaign on IdeaScale Crowd, you will, within the first hour of launch, see at least like 5 ideas posted. And it depends on the prompt. If you're looking for kind of in-depth answers, for example, that insurance products question or the Lake Tanganyika one, it might take a little bit longer for people to start posting ideas, because they will post multi-page ideas. But if you're asking something that's more, what new products would you like to see in the Target dorm room, or what new McDonald's breakfast menu items would you like to see? It's immediate. People, as soon as they get that email from us, they log in, they start posting.
Somebody wanted to know if you had any sense of what the demographics of the crowd are.
Yeah, so that is info we are always trying to collect. Right now, what we do know is we have kind of a 50-50 split between men and women on the crowd, mostly between, plurality between 25 and 34, kind of skews a bit younger, highly educated. A lot of people with bachelor's and master's degrees, backgrounds in education and marketing and technology. And as far as what kind of campaigns that they like to participate in, they love branding, new product development, anything that lets them get creative and be heard, especially by companies that they know of and whose products and services they might use. They love having their voices heard there.
And on your links that you have there, we have some of that breakdown for IdeaScale Crowd participants on the website too, if anybody wanted to follow up and check that out. Another question about expectations. Do you have any sense of like the ratio of these like repeat super users that are participating in every campaign versus new or one-time users?
So that is something I want to dig into in a bit more detail in the next few weeks, because we do have like a core group of like 10 or 15 users that we always expect to see in every campaign. But I found, interestingly, with this insurance campaign, the most recent one that we just wrapped up, we had dozens of new people signing up for the crowd just so they could participate in that campaign. And I was really, really excited about that, because at least to me, insurance is not like the most accessible topic to talk about. I don't know as much about it as probably I should, but a lot of people had a lot that they wanted to say and a lot they wanted to learn and share. So it depends on the campaign. The ones that we ask for kind of as much participation as possible from as many people as possible, we'll get like 100 different people participating, and the breakdown is that same group of 10 to 15 core users and a bunch of new signups, or a bunch of people that have been part of the community for a while and came out of the woodwork. Whereas with this insurance campaign, we have fewer of the core users and a lot more of those new users. So it's interesting. I would say that probably like 20% though would be the, I was just talking with someone about the 80-20 principle. 20% of the participants in our campaigns are those core users, though.
Well, I think I don't see any other questions coming in. Now my dog's barking. So if anybody wants to ask any further questions that they think of after this meeting is over, we will be following up, as we said, with the recording, the deck, as well as Sarah's contact information, and a special offer for all of you who attended the webinar. So if you are thinking of launching a campaign on IdeaScale Crowd, we are offering a discount to people who sign up for that, who attended this webinar. So we'll be sending out the details for that too, in case you want to take advantage of that.